we are looking at how we can graphically represent tastes through indifference curves, which we said is a set of all those consumption bundles that you're indifferent between, i.e., those that give you the same level of happiness. And then we were looking at how the four assumptions that we made, what do each of these imply in terms of our indifference curves? We started off talking about completeness and transitivity, and now we want to look at what does a monotonicity assumption imply for our indifference curves. Now, if you recall, monotonicity assumption is the idea that more is better than less. Now, to understand what the monotonicity assumption implies for our indifference curves, we need to first see the difference between what we call a good and a bad. Now, a commodity is a good if it's a commodity the consumer likes, and it's a bad if it's a commodity the consumer does not like. Now, monotonicity assumption, which is this idea that more is better, is satisfied if all commodities are goods, because obviously goods are those for which more is better, right? So more is because monotonicity is the idea that more is better than less, and a commodity which is a good is a commodity which the consumer likes. So more of that is better than less. So that's a monotonicity assumption is only satisfied if all commodities, again the keyword is all commodities are goods. In terms of ICs, then in that case, once all commodities are goods and monotonicity assumption is satisfied, it would imply that you will have downward sloping ICs and your utility would increase in the northeast direction. Let's try to understand why would ICs be downward sloping. Now, if X1 is a good and so is X2, then individuals' preferences we know satisfy monotonicity as consuming more of both is better. These are both commodities the consumer likes. The individual likes X1, so gets happy by consuming more of X1, right? X1 is a good, more, you like that commodity, more is better for that commodity, so you get happy by consuming more of it. Now, to maintain happiness along same indifference curve, because we know indifference curve shows us all those consumption bundles you are indifferent between that give you the same level of happiness. So if X1 has gone up, you're getting more happy. So to maintain happiness along the same indifference curve, you have to decrease X2, which is a good, to offset the happiness which was introduced by consuming more of X1. So increase in X1 is accompanied by decrease in X2 to maintain happiness along same IC. Thus, in this case, indifference curves are downward sloping because they're downward sloping because if I increase X1, that's going to make you more happy. So to maintain happiness along the same IC, we need to reduce X2, which is also good, so that your happiness stays the same along that same IC. So an increase in X1 is accompanied by decrease in X2 to maintain happiness along same IC, so thus you have downward sloping indifference curves. And utility increases in the northeast direction. Why is that? So there are two things that we talk about, that ICs are downward sloping and utility increases in northeast direction. Why is that? Because more of both X1 and X2 make the individual happy. So the individual is happy. Like over here, if we are plotting an IC, this is X2, this is X1. So more of both X2 and X1 makes the individual happy. This utility increases in this direction. So this is what monotonicity assumption implies for our ICs. That this would, so monotonicity assumption is satisfied if all commodities are goods. And in terms of ICs, it will imply that you'll get downward sloping ICs with utility increasing in the northeast direction. So now what if monotonicity is violated? Now monotonicity will be violated when all commodities are not goods. So it could be the case that either one of the commodities is a bad or both of the commodities are bad. In both cases, monotonicity is violated because monotonicity is the idea that more is better than less. So it's only satisfied when all commodities are good. So even if at least one of them is bad, it will be violated. So let's look at both cases where one of the commodities is a bad and monotonicity is violated, and the other case where both of the commodities are bad and monotonicity is violated. If one of the commodities is a bad, monotonicity is a violated, and in this case, the ICs will be upward sloping. Let's try to see why. If X1 is a bad and X2 is a good, then individuals' preferences don't satisfy monotonicity as consuming more of X1 is not better. More is not better than less for X1. The individual hates X1, so gets unhappy. He doesn't like X1, it's bad, so gets unhappy by consuming more of it. So if you want to maintain happiness along same IC, have to increase X2, have to increase X2, which is a good, to offset the unhappiness which was introduced by consuming more of X1, which is a bad. So an increase in X1 is accompanied by increase in X2 to maintain happiness along same IC. So that's why your ICs are upward sloping in the case one of the commodities is a bad and one of the commodities is a good. Let's look at what if both the commodities are bads. If both commodities are bad, again monotonicity is violated, but ICs are going to still be downward sloping. So in the first case we saw where monotonicity was satisfied, ICs were downward sloping. But even if monotonicity is violated, it's possible that ICs are still downward sloping. Let's see why. If X1 is a bad and so is X2, then individual preferences don't satisfy monotonicity, as consuming more of both is not better. The individual does not like X1, it's a bad, so gets unhappy by consuming more of it. So if we want to maintain happiness along same IC, have to decrease X2, which is also bad, to offset the unhappiness which was introduced by consuming more of X1. So an increase in X1 is accompanied by decrease in X2 to maintain happiness along same IC. So indifference curves can be downward sloping even if monotonicity is violated. So we said yes, monotonicity does imply that ICs will be downward sloping, but ICs can still be downward sloping even if monotonicity is violated. Right. So while monotonicity does imply ICs are downward sloping, but it can still be but ICs can still be downward sloping even if monotonicity is violated. In short, if both commodities are goods, monotonicity is satisfied and we get downward sloping ICs. We saw the logic behind it. If one of them is a good, another is a bad, monotonicity is not satisfied and you'll get upward sloping ICs, and we looked at the logic behind it. If both are bads, again, monotonicity is not satisfied, but ICs are downward sloping. So monotonicity implies that ICs are downward sloping, but ICs can still be downward sloping even if monotonicity is not satisfied.